I'm Nancy Shanteau. I'd like to talk to you about relationships. I know when you hear the word relationships, you're probably thinking about romance, love, marriage, sex, the whole process of coupling up that happens in our culture. Of course, that's part of what I'm talking about. And I want to share some thoughts with you about how our conception of relationships produces a reality for many of us in which we feel like there's not enough love. In other words, we end up feeling like love is scarce. We look at films and TV and the relationships of people around us, and we might think, what's wrong with me? How come someone doesn't love me like that? But here's the worst part. We might even feel that way in a relationship. I remember one time in a relationship thinking, I've never felt more alone. The difference between how I felt and how I was supposed to feel made how I felt seem even worse. We think we're supposed to somehow find the one person who will meet all our needs, and on the flip side, we'll meet all their needs. Perfect, right? Unfortunately, this is not what tends to happen. Why do we feel alone? Sometimes the most alone when we have what we think we're supposed to want. And why do we want what we're supposed to have when getting it can make us feel so unhappy? It's a setup. The idealization of romantic love between two people has over-focused us on one kind of love. And then even when we get it, we compare ourselves to some sort of super romance in the movies or Disneyland that is supposed to satisfy all our needs. When we don't feel satisfied, we end up blaming ourselves or the person that we're with. When the romantic dream is falling short, it must be someone's fault. We might feel like we're too much or they're not enough, and on the flip side, like we'll never be enough for them or they're too needy. I'm no different. For years, I thought the reason I was unhappy was that I was single. I wondered why I didn't have love in my life, why it seemed so easy for other people, and what was wrong with me. When I did find someone who I loved and who seemed to love me, our happiness didn't seem to last long. Soon we'd be fighting, dissatisfied, we'd be going around the not good enough carousel. Who I was with might change, and yet the problem kept repeating itself. Since I live in California, some of my romantic partners would ask if we could open up our relationship. I loved the idea of ethical non-monogamy, but I had no idea how to implement it. It seemed like something somebody else could do, something someone else could make work. Every time I tried to open a relationship, I'd be racked with jealousy and hurt. I'd finally just give up and break up. It was like this for years. Serial monogamy, attempts at polyamory, serial breakups, round and round, over and over again. It was really tempting to blame myself. If only I could fix myself, I could have the love I wanted. I invested in personal development and communication courses. I developed mindfulness through meditation and yoga. I hired life coaches. I joined dating websites. I attended sex, love, and intimacy workshops. I learned about power and somatic embodiment and how to make changes in my life through practice. I learned self-compassion, self-love, and how to ask for 100% of what I wanted. All of this was truly wonderful. It changed how I felt about my life, and it started me down the path of creating my own business as a Skills for Change life coach. What it didn't solve was my love life. Now fast forward a few years, I finally met someone I really liked. As we talked, I realized he was the type of person who prioritized his freedom. He avoided labels, but he acknowledged that he lived by the many loves definition of polyamory. I decided to try polyamory again, but this time, instead of opening up an existing relationship, I embarked on freely relating with someone who knew what they were doing. I quickly encountered what Mel Mariposa calls the Monogamy Hangover. All of the baggage and ideas of how I should be treated and what I should want came roaring into my head at the most inconvenient moments. I found myself dwelling obsessively on what he was doing with his free time, whether I was as important to him as he was to me. With my thoughts seesawing around, racing from one bad scenario to another, I often felt overwhelmed and uncomfortable. Without a label that defined what we were doing, I had to evaluate my experience based on what I was feeling and how I was being treated. When I was clear-headed, I realized I was being treated with kindness, compassion, empathy, and that our communication was clear and connected. I didn't know how much of the obsessive thinking I could handle. Based on the anti-oppression training I learned from Skills for Change, I knew I could stop internalized oppression in the form of stressful thoughts. I imagined a future self who could handle everything that was happening. A wash of bemusement filled my body for a moment. It was like this bemused self and this tortured self coexisted in my head and in my body. Around this time, I learned about relationship anarchy. Now, anarchy has gotten a lot of bad press over the years, but anarchists have a long history of working collectively to create better lives for people. Their contribution to the labor movement helped eliminate child labor, and we gained collective bargaining, the 40-hour work week, and the weekend. I encourage you to give anarchists a chance to do the same thing for intimate relationships. Most anarchists agree on the values of autonomy, free association, and mutual aid. These turn out to be very helpful in relating with people. I also learned that monogamy has deep underlying possessiveness at its root. According to Dr. Kim Tallbear, monogamy is an outgrowth of settler colonialism, property ownership, and the hegemonic domination of humans by each other, animals, and the land. To me, dominance and oppression are not sustainable for our future. I'm committed to dismantling these structures in our governance, communities, and relationships. With a lot of work, one step at a time, I eventually got over the monogamy hangover. I learned, 1, I really like knowing that the person I'm relating with is freely choosing to spend time with me. My sense of freedom requires that I not control other people and their choices, and then not allow anyone to control me or my choices. The opposite of this is entitlement, where one person feels entitled to someone's time because of a label or a role. When someone directs their attention elsewhere, even to themselves, it can feel like a betrayal of the relationship and its importance. Entitlement over someone else's time and decision-making is completely unsustainable. 2, I love living alone, and I prefer to share time with someone who it suits me, and not by default. The community calls this lifestyle solo polyamory. Solo polyamorists talk about how role-based, hierarchical relationships often result in enmeshment, where we give up our freedom in exchange for some sort of security. Most solo polyamorists don't share finances, and many don't live with their sexual and romantic partners. Hierarchy, you might have heard of primary and secondary in polyamorous relationships, that exists when people recreate the rules of monogamy and coupleism. When we attempt to secure our own safety, we end up taking away other people's choices, and worse, we attempt to control other people's relationships. Even though it seems safer, this attempt to control tends to leave us feeling worse. It takes away our own experience of feeling chosen. We end up focusing on how they would choose the other person if the rule didn't exist, and we feel less valuable and less worthy of being chosen ourselves. 3, it feels really good to enjoy someone's happiness, even when that happiness doesn't directly include me. Just imagine somebody eating a really good peach across the room. You can feel the juice coursing down your mouth and coming into your body. So sweet, so good. Polyamorists call this feeling compersion. It functions as the opposite of jealousy. I learned to practice compersion on the partner dance floor by enjoying other people dancing and enjoying my own dances. People often think jealousy is about other people's behavior, but I've learned that it's much more complicated than that. Jealousy is a compound emotion. It tends to include feelings of shame based on experiences of powerless, as well as fear of being left out or abandoned, of losing control, of being socially diminished, of being less valuable or lovable, and of not being important. The antidotes to jealousy often include figuring out what's 100% of what we want and why we want it. 4, the people I'm relating with sexually can and do relate sexually with other people. These other people know about me, care about me, support me. I know about them, care about them, and support them. The polyamory community calls these people metamors. I've discovered that instead of the competition I was expecting, I share deep, loving, connected relationships with these wonderful women. And the first time I witnessed 2 people I was relating sexually with, both dancing together on the partner dance floor, I almost fell over with complete happiness. Competition is much more likely when there is scarcity. People start to think of themselves and each other's as objects that can be stolen. No one can steal the alchemy we create with another person. And when we don't have to limit our love, we can share ourselves and our hearts freely. 5, in relationship anarchy, we really value all our relationships, especially our friendships. When we limit sharing our lives to only relationships that include sex and romance, we have to find one special person in order to make our lives work. In her book, Minimizing Marriage, Dr. Elizabeth Brake called this idea amatonormativity. She challenges the idea that sex or romance are necessary to create a bond of trust with people, or even that it's a good idea to tie these behaviors together. You're great in this act. Want to buy a house? It doesn't make any sense, really. When we limit our future plans to sharing our life with one person, we often end up waiting to achieve major goals. Then, when we finally meet someone, we can overpressure a new relationship, trying to move it up the relationship escalator. The relationship escalator is Amy Garin's name for the one-way direction a romantic relationship is supposed to progress, from dating to exclusive dating, to living together, engagement, marriage, buying a home, having children, raising children, retiring, and finally dying. Relationships aren't measured by what we learn or how happy we are, but whether we progress and remain on the escalator. This is some heavy pressure. Instead of dropping our friends when we start a romantic relationship, why not make romance and sex something that happens between friends? When we don't over-prioritize sex and romance, we can then create our lives with the humans we love and trust most in the world. Imagine buying a home with your best friend, living with people you enjoy spending time with, sharing resources and finances in ways most people haven't yet imagined. 6, we haven't imagined what's possible because we're spending all of our time chasing a nearly impossible dream. Some people make it work, no question. After all, the government is making monogamous marriage a very attractive prospect. Monogamy as a governmentally supported relationship structure conveys between 6,000 and 9,000 rights, depending on what state you live in. By granting those rights and benefits only to folks who fit the mononormative mold, many people are left without access to resources they need. And when marriage fails, single-parent households are left destitute. We destroyed the village in favor of a nuclear family that fails us and our kids on a regular basis. If the romantic ideal has failed you, left you feeling broken or not good enough, and your loneliness feels a judgment on your lovability, if you envision an inclusive community filled with different styles of relating and more resource sharing opportunities, maybe some of these alternative relationship structures will work for you. Maybe they'll change your life. They've certainly changed mine. One day, 3 years ago in 2016, my future self arrived and my tortured self started fading away. Most days when I think about my life, I feel overwhelmed by an abundance of love, connection, mutual care, support, and wonderful people. My relationships are so much more than love and sex, and they nourish me in all the ways that we hope, long, and dream to experience. All of which to say, monogamy is no longer the only way to give and receive love. In the United States, between 5 to 10% of the population are currently enjoying alternative relationship structures and co-creating new ways of living and loving. These new ways of relating are allowing people to share more types of love with more people in their lives and co-create new and powerful support networks and relationships. We're learning to receive what is available so that no one person is responsible for fulfilling our needs. Instead of scarcity and not being good enough, how we live and how we love can fill us with feelings of abundance and belonging. If you're curious, you can join a local polyamory or relationship anarchy group on Meetup or Facebook. You can read Andy Nordgren's Relationship Anarchy Manifesto online, and you can begin imagining a new life for yourself. It's possible, it's extraordinary, and you can do it. I hope this talk was helpful to you, even if you don't plan to change your current relationship structures. When we change our perspective, we change what's possible. We change who we are and who we can become. The world needs us to gain this flexibility so we can envision new possibilities for ourselves and our communities. May we become our best selves in life and in love. Thank you.